Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I want to show you a very rare fairy shrimp from Florida. Meet Dendrocephalus proeliator. Before we dive deeper into this video, please forgive me on the videotaping. They are quite small, so it's very difficult to get them on camera. Plus, they're pretty self-aware and they would dart away every time I got close. To begin, I want to talk about the discovery of this fairy shrimp, which happens to be a co-discovery. One of them, an entomologist from Florida, Ann Dunn, and it all started in 2016. She was an undergraduate at our Cold Biological Station looking to study antlions. After spending time in the area, she ended up actually discovering a new species of fairy shrimp. Then later on, becoming a co-author on a publication in 2019 with D. Christopher Rogers and Wayne Price, in which they describe the species and also note really unique behavior amongst the males. I'll make sure to link this research article in the description so you can also get a chance to look at their work. In the research article, they noted the male-on-male aggression was really unique to this group of fairy shrimps, in which they actually gave them the species name, Dendrocephalus proeliator. Just to give some context, the genus name Dendrocephalus actually combines Greek words meaning tree head. And that is because if you look at the male's frontal appendages, it does kind of look like branches on a tree. Another thing that I would like to note is that this species of Dendrocephalus native to North America is actually under a subgenus known as Dendrocephalinus. Now, the specific epithet, proeliator, is derived from a Latin meaning warrior, because the male individuals of the species continuously like to fight for territory. I really wish I had footage of this behavior, but they ended up not being too active after all, so there wasn't much to record. Every now and then, the males would size each other up and bump into each other, but that was pretty much it. In the research article, they described this behavior as hilltopping. This is where a male fairy shrimp will actually resource guard a specific territory or area in the water column, waiting for a receptive female to pass by. However, it can actually be another male that enters his zone. As a result, these males will aggressively size each other up. And then it gets physical, as they will actually start headbutting each other in confrontation, and the two males will actually spin in circles while clashing their frontal appendages. And in my head, this is actually hilarious that these little fairy shrimps are fighting for little fairy shrimp territory and getting physical, just because after so much culturing, I know how fragile fairy shrimps are. A little piece of algae can take them out if they get caught in it. Now, when it comes to the physical traits of this fairy shrimp, I don't quite know how big they get, but in my culture, they are very small. They have reached sexual maturity and are producing eggs, so I don't think they'll get too much bigger than this. Both male and female individuals have a orange to yellow hue across their translucent body. There does seem to be some sexual dimorphism, especially when it comes to the cercopods. The females tend to have much redder cercopods, while the males are pretty much yellow. And on average, the females tend to be slightly bigger than the males. This species can coexist with Streptocephalus seali, and both females of those species look very similar. So at the moment when I was growing these, I wasn't sure what species I had growing. But as the females matured, it was pretty evident that I had Dendrocephalus proeliator. And the brood pouch of this species is pretty distinct, as the base is pretty wide, and the farther you go, or distal, it tends to narrow. When it comes to identifying the species by the males, you technically use the second antennas and frontal appendage. However, these structures can be very complex and hard to describe, so I will refer you to the research article. But just basically know that this is an intermediate species between Dendrocephalus alucha and Dendrocephalus lithica. The next thing I want to talk about is the habitat and life cycle of this fairy shrimp. So I'm really excited that I get to bring this species into the light because Dendrocephalus proeliator is an endemic species to temporary freshwater environments known as ephemeral ponds or vernal pools within Central and South Florida. The entomologist that I mentioned before, Ann Dunn, is doing amazing work in Florida by surveying a lot of wetland habitats. So maybe she has new light to the distribution of the species or other things. But at the moment, this fairy shrimp is only known from a few localities and is actually considered critically endangered because of that. Unfortunately, like most other organisms that are underlooked, These guys are not protected. So hopefully this video brings this species into the light and gets people talking about fairy shrimp. The most difficult part when it comes to protecting these group of crustaceans is just the habitat that they live in. So these fairy shrimp are capable of producing eggs that are heat resistant and drought resistant. And they basically lay in the soil during the dry season, and then when the water comes, they hatch, grow, and reproduce. And that is basically the whole premise of them. So when their habitats are completely dry, you don't always know that they're there. So when we're building more houses or schools and flattening the land, we're basically destroying their habitat. Moreover, their ecosystem is very fragile. If there's changes to the salinity or to the climate, which also messes with the hydro period, it can actually cause populations to be extirpated in certain localities. Runoff from farms can also be a major issue. So I notice when I'm culturing algae to feed my fairy shrimp, if there's too much phosphates or nitrates within the water and I'm feeding my fairy shrimps, it will just automatically kill them. And I can only imagine populations in the wild, how farm runoff can impact them. So this fairy shrimp is really rare and extremely specialized to its habitat. Now that we got all this juicy information out of the way, I really want to talk about culturing this species and how amazing it is. So I have my connections and network in the shrimp world, and I was gifted substrate containing eggs of this species, in which I will be forever grateful. Within the substrate, other Branchiopod species occurred, and this include other species of fairy shrimp and clam shrimp. So when I hatched them, it was a ton of null ply. And I had to let them grow just a little bit so I can identify which ones are fairy shrimp. I didn't quite know what conditions that they preferred, since they're all adapted to specific minerals that leach from the substrate. But like I said in other videos, fairy shrimps have a tolerance or a range of conditions that they can handle. So I just did a general tap water tank with some added minerals, and it seemed to work just fine. But in the container where I had the original substrate and all the little baby shrimps, I went ahead and pulled out any little null ply that was giving fairy shrimp, and I put it in this separate tank so I can isolate the species. As you can see the results, I was pretty on point. All the individuals that I put out were fairy shrimps, and it turns out they all were Dendrocephalus proeliator. Based on other species of Dendrocephalus that I've cultured, I assume that these are also a warm water species, so I kept it at around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and at night it dropped to 64 degrees Fahrenheit. And they didn't seem to mind those colder temperatures at all. The last thing I did for my tank was inoculate it with algae and other microbes. These algae cultures that I have are truly the bread and butter to my success, especially when growing these fairy shrimp. If you have the water parameters just right with the good amount of microbes and algae, your fairy shrimp are pretty much good to go, and all you need to do is sit back and relax. It only took about 2 to 3 weeks before most of them reached sexual maturity. There were a few individuals that seemed stunted and just didn't want to grow. I don't know if maybe there was an ammonia spike or a buildup of toxic waste byproducts, or it could also just be different cohorts in the population that grow at different conditions. One behavior that I notice with this specific species of fairy shrimp, and it doesn't seem to be across the whole genus, just this species, is that they're super self-aware and their sensory is pretty amazing. I could be a few feet from the tank trying to look in, and they already sense my presence and start to dart away. Recording them took such a long time because I couldn't get them to sit still for a while. And so after a couple minutes of holding still, they finally calmed down and let me record them. But if I made any sudden movement, they would all start darting again. And this doesn't really match up to other species of fairy shrimp that I have, because most of them they're aware that you're in their presence and they might move away, but you have to be up in their face before they even do that. So recording the species was a literal pain, but I sat still enough that I got some pretty amazing footage. One of them was actually their mating ritual. The males will scout around looking for a receptive female, and once he does, he basically aligns his body with hers, and using his frontal appendages, kind of latches onto her and then begins the mating process. With other groups of fairy shrimp, the mating process is very quick, only taking like a few seconds, and then the male latches off and the female darts away. But with this species, the male kind of latches on for a while. I have not seen them mate that often, so I don't know if this is maybe an exception. But then there was an instance on some male-on-male mating, and it lasted quite a bit, so I'm assuming this species, takes their time to mate. This is my first time seeing this behavior with this group of fairy shrimps. I'd say it's pretty common within the genus Branchiopod. They will literally latch on to anything that's nearby. Well, that basically concludes the video on Dendrocephalus proeliator, an endemic species of fairy shrimp from Central and South Florida. If you really like this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. I really like the engagement and talking to y'all. It really means a lot. If you're new to my videos, please subscribe. It really motivates me to make more of this content, and I really enjoy doing so. If you're interested in culturing a few native species, I actually sell them on my website, Branchiopod.com. And it's a great way to experience these amazing crustaceans, or if you're in a classroom setting, you can also teach little kids or teenagers about these unique crustaceans and their habitats. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.